Well, Chris, first of all, thanks for doing this, man. Great seeing you. What's a week like for you when you've got two games? I know what it's like for me. I know what it's like when I got three or four games, and I know you're there too when you're doing tennis and football. But when you have a college game, you got Red River, then you have Texas, Georgia, and then you have the Cardinals 2 days later. What's a week in the life of Chris Fowler like?
Not much extra time for stuff. I try to keep my mental health intact by getting a workout in or a nice walk in. But as you know, there's not much time for the fringes, and I love it. I love being able to straddle both the biggest college games and NFL games. I'm glad it's not every week. I don't know how I would do it every week, but I've learned over a couple of years now how to manage the time better. And what works better for me is to do the second game first. Like I'm looking at the Cardinals and the Chargers early in the week, began actually Sunday and Monday, and kind of get a foothold, put it away, focus on the college. And then the minute the game is over on Saturday night, there's a plane ride to Phoenix. There's that time, there's all day Sunday and all day Monday to focus exclusively on the NFL games. That's how it works for me. Second game first, first game second.
Yeah, I've got an NBA opening night game next Wednesday, so I'm actually starting on that a little bit early.
Right.
And part of that is because they haven't played a game yet, so it's easier to get ready for that as opposed to, when you have other games going on in the middle of the season. What about when you're working with different analysts, and not just different analysts, but going from Kirk in a two-person booth to Dan and Lewis in a three-man booth, and those guys, well, Lewis in particular, because he's doing a college game every week, Dan is doing studio, but they're working with other people too. So how challenging is that to kind of develop the chemistry with the new guys? You obviously, Kirk, have been working together, whether it's game day or games, forever.
Yeah, it almost feels like a different job. I love Lewis and Dan, and those guys are so plugged into the NFL. The part of the fun for me, Dave, is I learn a lot about the league through them. I know football, but I don't know the inner workings of the NFL and how teams are assembled. And I don't know teams like the Cardinals and the Chargers that well. Living on the East Coast, in Miami and New York, we don't see those teams on television. I'm just not kind of conversant in either franchise. So a week like this, I'll lean on them a lot. I'll spend extra time on that. Georgia and Texas have just had each of those teams, so the preparation is largely done. It's just kind of fine tuning. And once we get to Austin, we'll lock in and talk to those teams, and well, I'll be ready for that game. I know that Lewis and Dan and Laura Rutledge are great assets for me. It feels really different working with those guys. I think that a three-man booth is something different for me. I haven't done that much. Did it on Thursday night way back when, but it's been a long time since I've done that. And sometimes working with Kirk is like working with two analysts because he's very active and he's very involved in a great way. But I think that the rhythm is different because Lewis and Dan, when you have a three-man booth, I don't know if you've experienced this in the same way, but those guys, one being an offensive guy, one being a defensive guy, see the game through a very different lens. So depending on what happens in a given play, I'll look over and they're doing this kind of like pantomime communication. Who's going to go first? Who's going to tell us straight? Who's going to jump in there? Whether or not it's a QB centric comment or a defensive comment that's obviously more in Lewis's wheelhouse, being an XDB. And sometimes I've had to learn to kind of call it differently because I give a very economical call with Kirk. I try to be very generous. I'll make a call, caught Jones, first down to the 42, stop, let him get in. He likes to get in quickly. We'll like to do a replay or two because I want it back before the snap. Now, with those guys, I've learned, and I've told them I'm going to do this, I'm going to give an extra line. Caught by Jones, first down. So the third-year man out of Arkansas, 4 catches already today, guys. He's been seldom used coming in. Boom. Then that gives them time to sort of get what they're doing, and they'll dive in and do it. So it's just a matter of figuring things out so there's not an awkward pause where they're like looking around and the viewer doesn't know what's going on. So it's fine tuning, but again, those guys are so easy to work with. I have a blast, and I'll tell you what's different about the NFL games than college is we actually have a lot of time to hang together as a crew. And that means, if possible, watch a practice. Not always easy with the college schedule, but be on the Zoom calls, have a dinner. What a concept. And be able to hang together, on the field pregame. And I love the experience of an NFL pregame. It's so different than college. You can talk to the players. There's far fewer of them out there, as you know. And so that's cool. I mean, Kirk's schedule is so crazy. The energy required. of him to do the Amazon games on Thursday, college game day in the morning, our game at night. Because we've had so many years together, it clicks, it works. But ideally, you'd want to hang out. You'd want to spend more time in the prep and more time just socializing. But it's not there. And I love that on Mondays, we can actually hang out a little bit. And I could, again, learn from them a lot.
It's interesting you say that about the time together, because I don't know that the fan at home realizes how important that is. The chemistry, again, it's different with you and Kirk, but for the most part, with people that you're working with, you haven't known for 25 years. So that time together, the chemistry you build off the air is important on the air. And you mentioned kind of too, Dan and Lewis trying to figure out who's going to go in the nonverbal language. When I work with Bill Walton, he just did that to himself because there were multiple personalities there.
Which personality was going to take over at that moment?
How about when you call college football versus NFL in terms of enthusiasm level? Because your enthusiasm on college football is off the charts. I love it. And it's great. But in the NFL, it's different because you don't have the bands, you don't have the cheerleaders. So the director's not usually going to cut to all of that. It's different. So how have you managed that from college to NFL in terms of, when to really punch it on NFL? Because in college, you could almost do it like every down, especially if you're doing a championship game like you do.
I don't like to do it every down, to be honest with you. I like to meet the moment. We certainly had a lot of big moments in the Georgia-Alabama game. I don't think I've ever screamed louder in a booth on consecutive plays at the end of the game when it was going back and forth. It was lunacy. It was great fun to do. I went from that to the Dolphins-Titans game 2 days later. Tyler Huntley brought in as the third string quarterback. They struggled to make a first down. The place was a morgue. It was challenging. I think you just let it happen organically. I'd be foolish for me, as you know, to start shouting at Hard Rock Stadium every time they make a 4-yard gain, even though I felt like that was a big deal. But so I didn't put a lot of thought into how I'm going to do the NFL differently. I listened to a lot of NFL games. There's people I really respect to do it spectacularly. Tirico, Buck, others, and I think that, obviously Al Michaels, their presentation is different because the vibe is so different in the stadiums typically. The urgency isn't quite there the same way as it is in college, and you're not yelling up over, as you said, 100,000 people in the band typically. So I think naturally your presentation is going to be different. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. If we get excitement on an NFL game, I hope to be as excited then as I am, in a big college game. Kyler takes off, runs for 50 yards, puts up the finger at the 40-yard line. I'll get very excited about a play like that if that happens on Monday night. But I think it happens less frequently than in college, and typically we're getting games that just feel huge and kind of push through the screen. And I think that it requires you to meet that in the way that the people who've called college football over the years have done. I don't know that I set out to be excited in college. It just kind of happens if the play warrants it. But I don't want to be someone who's at that place. You're a master. You calibrate it. You don't want to be here the whole game. Where you can't. There's not much room to go up from there. So I generally am pretty conversational on a routine play, and then try to rise up when the moment calls for it.
You mentioned Kyler, and you did obviously a bunch of his games when he was in college. What do you see as you watch him? And I know you're not probably dialed in just yet because we're taping this on Tuesday and you've got other games. But what do you see when you've watched him in the NFL compared to college? How have you seen him grow? What do you think based on what you've seen now 6 years into the NFL?
Yeah, I have a special feel for all the guys who win the Heisman. You get to know them pretty well in the process. I did call plenty of his games at Oklahoma. And I called up the playoff game against Alabama, the epic semifinal game when they went back and forth. Came up short, but put a lot of points on the board after falling way behind. And then obviously in the awards season, you get a connection with them. And I become fans of them individually as they move to the NFL. That's been that way for a long, long time. I've done something like 30 Heisman Trophy shows. So it's a lot of guys. They're all retired. Half of them are. But the guys who are in the league, whether it's Lamar or Baker, Kyler, certainly, even going back to Derrick Henry, some of the guys who are better, I have a real feel for them. I want them to do well. I want them to succeed well. and represent the trophy. I'm very conscious of where they go. Are the position pieces in place for them to succeed in their new home? And sometimes the answer is no. I feel badly for Bryce Young, for example. I feel really good for Jaden Daniels because I'm a fan of his. And I think that when a generational talent like that in college comes into the league and has the stats he's had, it's cool. Kyler hasn't had quite that success. I know he's surrounded with the pieces that would allow him to. I think he's grown as a passer. His skill set that we saw at Oklahoma will never lose. He'll never lose that. A dynamic runner. Those kind of plays are exciting. Defenses scheme around them, as you know. So he becomes a focal point when he's out there. And I think that, I'm not, the Green Bay game was the last one I've screened. I will look at other games, look at the San Francisco game, for example. I don't want to judge based on that debacle in Lambeau Field. I think he's still got work to do, but I think the skills have translated, and I think there's going to be a point where, I don't know how the Cardinals season is going to go. There are some folks who are bearish on that, and we'll see how it plays out Monday. I think Monday is an important moment for them, and Tyler's contract, that's going to be an issue, as going forward. So let's see how they do. Let's see how he does. But I love calling games involving dynamic quarterbacks like that, and I hope he makes a bunch of plays on Monday.
You mentioned the time you get when you're doing the Heisman show. What does that look like? How much time do you get to spend with the candidates? And how often do you walk away from those conversations like, wow, I really like this person. I want to, follow this person, as opposed to not naming names, but guys are like, okay, wasn't as friendly as I hoped to be, or didn't give me the information they want, because there's always guys like that.
There are. I think, first of all, you start out calling plenty of their games throughout a career. Typically, if they're a Heisman guy, they're playing in high-profile games. So you get a chance to see them in the field and have those conversations in the preparation for a regular game. As they become Heisman finalists, I have conversations with all of them, because we approach the Heisman show as though everyone has an equal chance to win. Whether it's usually 4 guys, typically now 4, and I try to spend time with all of them on the phone, talking to their coaches, possibly their high school coaches, opponents, teammates, to get a really clear picture about what makes them the player they are. Families are a part of the equation. Once you get to New York, and you get to meet their families if you haven't known them before. And so you really get a well-rounded picture of these guys, and very few of them have been, pardon the expression, turds, as coaches like to use to describe guys who are not polished and not team guys. These guys generally have gotten where they are because they're team football players, and they approach things the right way. And so I generally don't come away from the experience lukewarm or negative on any of the Heisman winners. And I hope they all succeed well. It makes the trophy look good. So,
did you have, because we don't have Big Ten anymore, at least the last 2 years, did you have Marvin Harrison Jr. at all? Did you have any of his games at Ohio State, or get a chance to talk to him at all?
Yeah, I did. We had him blowing up at the Rose Bowl when he was a freshman, kind of his coming out party as a young player. Had his first couple of seasons. Obviously didn't have him last year, but knew of him. It does create an impediment to getting to know these guys when you don't have the Big Ten. So there's no way around that. But I got to know him in the process. Obviously, he was in New York as a finalist. So yeah, I did. And I think he's a guy that he's just one of those transcendent talents that you hope will get in a good situation and be able to flourish. I think people around the league, you talk to them. I've done a little homework. I know our guys certainly believe that he is that kind of talent. Will have a monster career. The stats haven't quite been there yet. And I think kind of digging into why that is, whether there's still a connection that's developing between Kyler and Marvin, I don't know. We'll get more answers. I hope to be able to see him out there on Monday. And I'm not terribly optimistic given the nature of what the head knock that he took, but I look forward to watching him develop throughout his career, because he is one of those guys that, he's a wow guy. I saw him in many practices at Ohio State. Knew his dad, talked to his dad while they were watching practice, and saw what Marvin could do way before we even saw it in games.
One of the things you'll do when you're out here, and you'll do during the week if you're not here in person, is coaches meetings. Have you met Jonathan Gannon at any point? Just curious if you've had a chance to talk to him at all. He's got endless energy. If you haven't, be ready.
No, I'm aware of that. I've been told about that. I look forward to that. I have not met him before, so he's not a guy that I have any kind of background with, which is not uncommon. A lot of these NFL guys, they know of me. They see me as kind of like a fresh face, not someone they deal with all the time who's a pain in their ass. So that's sometimes nice. You come in there, you're not the usual suspect in these Zoom meetings, or they've had, they like college football. Some even like tennis, and they want to talk tennis, which is fun for me because I see these guys from afar. So didn't really know Sean McDermott, but gotten a sense of who he is now, and Doug Peterson and different guys like that. So I look forward to experiencing the Ganon energy because I've certainly heard about it.
One guy you are very familiar with is Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
One of my favorites was I was doing a Michigan game with Greg McElroy several years ago, and Jake Butt was, I think, at the point like a second or third round prospect, and Greg asked something about going in the first round, and Harbaugh goes, "Well, Greg, as you know, or as you should know, tight ends don't often go in the first round." But it's just funny, like the way he did it, like a little, as you know, or as you should know, like. What you obviously have probably had those moments. What's it like? And hopefully, obviously Coach Harbaugh's health is good.
Yeah.
What's it like when you meet with him?
I enjoy it. I like people who are bright, but maybe a little quirky, maybe a little eccentric. I think those labels apply to Jim, but really, really good at their job. And there's been an evolution. I think there's a trust factor you have to gain with him, or you're going to get very little. We would have a tendency to go in there, Dave, for the big games. So Harbaugh on the week of a Penn State game, or God forbid, an Ohio State game. I mean, it's different. I don't expect these guys to be loose and relaxed and forthcoming and transparent and all that stuff in our interviews. But over time, I gained trust. I'm one of the few that's able to watch Michigan practices, not very often, but occasionally. And we've had Michigan in playoff games. He's been great. He's been wonderful. I mean, I think he was very much at peace with himself. I think he knew this next step was coming while Michigan was making the run to the championship last year, because he was a different guy when we met with him in the playoff games and before the championship game. And it was delightful. And he was very open. We were telling old stories. He loves to tell the old stories about growing up with John and his dad. And so I like Jim a lot. And I look forward to connecting out there in the Chargers hotel in Arizona. I think he's okay. I think we'll talk openly about his arrhythmia situation, which he's already talked about. So definitely wish him well and look forward to seeing him. And I think if you look at the Chargers, all the people who analyze these teams more closely than I have so far see a really sound football team that reflects good coaching, that doesn't beat itself, that doesn't have a lot of busts on defense. I think that the offense is still a work in progress. I think Herbert not being healthy, it has been holding that offense back. I think Greg Roman will unleash much more of the passing attack. I think maybe not so fortunately for the Cardinals, they'll see a Chargers offense that's firing on more cylinders than they have been. We got a glimpse against Denver in the first half, and they pulled back. But I think Harbaugh's fingerprints are still on it. They still want to run the ball and be physical. But I think that you've got to use Herbert in that cast of young receivers and let them develop. But no, it's a long answer. I mean, Jim is endlessly interesting to me. I look forward to seeing him. I do wish him well, with the Chargers too.
I want to go back to college. You are a Colorado guy, so give me your thoughts on Coach Prime. Are you surprised at all? They have looked better this year than they did the second half of last year. And maybe that's because they have arguably the best player in the country in Travis Hunter, and they have a quarterback that could go first overall or the first quarterback. Have you had them at all since he took over? You guys might get him at some point down the road.
We had them last year, but the sizzle had worn off. We had them in the Rose Bowl against UCLA, and I regret not having them earlier in the season. I was out there for their spring game before his first season in the snow with 50,000 people turned out to watch a spring scrimmage involving almost none of the players who eventually played on that 23 team. They did a huge roster cleanse after the spring game. All those guys, Hunter and Shedeur Sanders and Shiloh Sanders, were there. A whole bunch of new guys came in. Didn't surprise me that they faded in the Pac-12. They're facing an elite quarterback almost every week with a deeply troubled defense. And I'm disappointed they cratered to 4-8. I thought that a 500 record, a bowl game was a possibility, especially after the start they got. I was under no illusions that they were a contender in the Pac-12. Change conferences to the Big 12, the path is a lot clearer, less hurdles to sort of mediocrity, to a bowl bid. I watched the Kansas State game. I'm invested a little bit. We don't really cover that team. I think it's unlikely we'll do a game out of the Big 12 involving CU, sadly. But I think I can be a fan involving them, therefore. So I was watching the Kansas State game in the wee hours, Big 12 after dark, which takes the place of Pac-12 after dark craziness these days. And, it comes down to a couple plays at the end. But what was most cool as an alum was watching a place that was a morgue, dead. Folsom Field was lifeless for years, sold out, rocking under the lights, invested student body, tremendous energy, tough on the visitors. And that's been the case for most of the games, his 2 years there. And I hope that continues. I hope it continues beyond this season. I think it's always an open question. It's always year to year with Deion, but I hope he has a long future there.
I do feel like the expansion of the college football playoff has made regular season games more interesting and intriguing. There were a lot of people going into the year, not us, but I think skeptics or traditionalists who are like, it's not good for regular season games. But I don't know, watching college football, how you can't feel it's enhanced regular season games. Where do you side on that?
Yeah, the importance of any one regular season game is diminished. No way around that, right? Because you're not losing out for the most part. I think we're going to get to a lot of lose and out games in the stretch run. There'll be so many games, Dave, affecting the playoff picture in November. It's going to be ridiculous. You know how it was last year in the NFL? I mean, there were like 3 or 4 games a weekend that didn't have some playoff importance. All the others did. And I think in college, with these conferences really kind of doing away with divisions and the top 2 teams getting into the championship game and tiebreakers and all kinds of stuff, it's going to be mayhem down the stretch of the leagues to see who gets those 2 bids in the championship games of the ACC and the Big 10, SEC, Big 12. And that's first of all. So you're going to have a lot of games that are going to impact the chase for those 2 spots. In some conferences, those 2 spots will be essential to get into the 12-team bracket, because you're not going to have Big 12 3 or ACC 3 get in the playoff. I mean, it's unlikely. I mean, they're going to fight to get 2 teams in, I think. And then the SEC and the Big 10, there's the fascinating conversation. Like, it's far better to finish 3rd than 2nd, isn't it, in a league? I mean, to lose the championship game, you've gone through a punishing physical experience and then go into a playoff bracket where you're going to have to try to win 4 games to win a championship. And I think you're going to have games, even like this Alabama-Tennessee game, okay, they each have a loss. Now, does a second loss knock them out? No, not necessarily, but every loss is, you lose a little bit more control of your destiny. And your game is now interconnected with all these other games to see where you stand if you start losing multiple games in a season. So Bama, Tennessee losers are going to have 2 losses. If Georgia doesn't win in Austin, they got 2 losses. And they haven't played Tennessee yet, and they haven't even gotten a chance to be in the SEC championship game yet. So there's a different kind of urgency, even though any one game isn't make or break. So
A couple more, we'll get you out of here, Chris, and appreciate the time. You're at the top of your profession doing the best college football games every week. You're doing NFL. You're the lead voice on tennis. You did the greatest pregame show, arguably, in any sport. For decades. Do you still think back to when you got your big break? And I don't know if it was when you got to ESPN. I don't know if it was with Scholastic Sports America when you were at ESPN already. Was there something even prior to that you look back and say, wow, that was when I finally got a shot to prove myself?
yeah, that's a good question. I think that, first of all, I've talked about this quite a bit with young people that I mentor. Making unconventional choices, listening to your own gut, your own inner voice, and not the static of well-meaning people around you who might love you, but they don't know best for you. I was told not to go to ESPN. So if I hadn't ignored that advice from professors and consultants, I would never have been on this path. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't feel connected to the experience of reading scores every night for 5 minutes at a local station. Nothing against people who do that. I was an intern, production assistant on the situations in Denver. I just didn't feel that was what for me. So I made a choice right out of the gate when you're out of school to go to the 7-year-old cable network and do a taped high school magazine show. Defied advice to do it. That was a break for me. That was obviously put me in position. 2 years later, they wanted me to go to LA and be the Sports Center bureau guy. Nothing against that job. It just didn't feel right to leave the headquarters in Bristol, even though I was young and single, and that's no place to be young and single, and go to LA, and where I would have gotten to cover, Dodgers, Lakers. They had no NFL team at that point, but USC, you get the point. And it just didn't feel like the right move. And I said, no, I'll stick with the high school show. They looked at me, kid, are you insane? You don't say no to us. We want you to go do this. But, a month later, how would you like to do sidelines on college football in the primetime game and do some features on this show called Game Day, which is a half-hour long on Saturday, watched by nobody? And a couple of years later, how would you like to host it? Nobody was elbowing me out of the way to get that job, by the way. I got the job when I was 26 or something, but no one else wanted it at that point. And I think, again, just listening to my gut, making a couple of choices early on to put me on the path, and then not leaving ESPN when the opportunities came would have been a stupid mistake. In long careers, we're all going to have moments, no matter what we do for a living, where we're frustrated. We don't feel appreciated, right? We don't feel fairly compensated, or whatever makes you feel uncomfortable. Those conditions will exist for all of us. And I didn't listen to that. I didn't run away from something. I never believe you should run away from something. You should run to something better. And there wasn't anything better for me that was offered. When I sat back and looked at it soberly, thank God I didn't leave, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. We've been having this conversation. So just knowing yourself really well and never making choices based on money, certainly not making choices based on ratings, or am I going to be seen more on this or that? Will I get famous doing this? None of that has ever mattered to me. It doesn't make me a virtuous person. I'm just being honest. It's never been a driving force. It's always been about the experience of doing it. Did it feel fun? Did it feel challenging or fulfilling? I still ask those questions every year. You get a chance to do the NFL. I love the NFL. It's football at the highest level. I like college better at this moment, but I still would love to have the experience doing NFL games. So you take the challenge on, knowing it's going to be hard, knowing you have a lot to learn, but just kind of leaping in there. And it's been awesome to do that. And I think that I always want to feel like there's something I haven't done that's going to be fulfilling and challenging. I got to get a hell of a lot better at calling NFL games. I think, that there's a challenge in that, because there's a learning curve. And I think that I always want to be better this game than last game. And as long as you've got stuff like that, right, it continues to drive you and inspire you.
Last one, and we were texting, said it was going to be all softballs. You said, no, I like curveballs. There was a rumor that when you hosted College Game Day, you never used a prompter, meaning it was all either up here or you used your notes. Is that true? And if so, that's freaking amazing.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I don't view it that way. First of all, a prompter would have been impractical. It's an outdoor show. It's hard to see it. And I know, no disrespect to production assistants around the world. I love you. You're valuable. We need you. But it's generally an entry-level person that runs the teleprompter. And I did Sports Center where it was required. Sometimes I got, there were anchors back in the day that would, Berman, for example, use it less than others. And so they would kind of wing it. Strongly discouraged from winging Sports Center. I wouldn't have done that. But I just got used to not using prompter early on in Game Day when it was a studio show. And I could do basketball raps, rapping kinds of games that you call for years. And there's no ability to script it or prompt it. I mean, prompter implies that the script is there on the page. And Game Day was never like that. I had note cards. I would write roll cues for packages, little cheat sheets, stats, segues in there. I have very neat writing. I just wrote them in these little cards, and That's why I used to hold in my hand. But it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to take on the challenge of not using a prompter. A prompter was just impractical, and Reese doesn't use one either. It's just not the way that show is done.
Still pretty great though. It's great stuff,
It's
man.
fun. Listen. I mean, I think that what we do, you have an energy about it because it's challenging. Because you're out there in that tightrope. You're out there with no safety net. You say something stupid these days, your career could be over by the time you get off the air. I could pick up my phone and do an Instagram video, and my career could be over in 30 seconds. That's the tightrope we walk. There's no net. Bill Walton, on the other hand, lasted a long time. We're going to have another conversation. We're going to have to do another episode. We talk about the various characters we've worked with, because that is the great joy. You know what I mean? Being able to work with Dick Vitale for many years. He's a dear friend. Lee Corso, obviously a character. John McEnroe, now in tennis. Those three names stick out because they, like Bill, are singular personalities. I'm not sure anyone's quite as singular as Bill, but I think that those guys, and there are many others. It's just such a joy to hang out with them and kind of see not just the games we do, but life through their unique lens. And I've learned so much from those guys. And being around Bill more would have been joyful for me, but it didn't happen.
100% on being around them and kind of seeing how they operate, but also how they make you better because they challenge you. You don't know what's coming. I assume with Vitale, and I've worked with Dick some too, not as much as you, but obviously a guy like McEnroe, you don't know what's coming and when it's coming, right?
You have a different attitude as a broadcaster when you do a match with Johnny Mac than if you do a match with any other tennis analyst. And I love John. We get along great. Once I earned his respect as someone who really embraces tennis and is authentic about their passion for it. I was probably a tennis fan actually before I was a college football fan. When his rival Jimmy Connors came on the scene, I talked to John about that. I'm only into tennis because of Jimmy. He hates that, but we have fun with that. But no, John is amazing in the way that he sees things. His type of analysis, when you pair it with his brother Patrick, who's a very different personality, who sees the sport differently, who didn't get by on the sheer brilliance of his talent. I mean, John was like Mozart. No one played like that. He was just a tennis savant as a teenager onward. Patrick was a grinder. Patrick got the most out of his ability. And as an analyst, he sees things differently than John. So you put him together, and we have a 3-man booth for the biggest tennis matches of the year, which we don't have for other matches. So we kind of just come together and have this understanding we're all going to have to pull back and do less, or this isn't going to work. And so it's a constant adjustment on the fly. But again, that challenge is what makes it fun. And then John will just turn to you and ask you some question that if you didn't do your homework, you're not going to know. And so I do prepare differently, knowing that John's going to turn. He doesn't really use notes. They're there in front of him, but he's looking at the court. So he'll just turn and ask you, what did he do the last tournament? What did he do in this Wimbledon tune-up? If I don't know what Matteo Berrettini did in Halle or Queen's Club, I got a problem. I'm going to look bad, and he doesn't care that there's a pause. Oh, let me check that, John. That's the wrong answer. No answer, or I'll get back to you on that is the wrong answer. So you like to have that top of mind. I don't know if Bill did that. But that's what you dealt with. You better be ready for anything, right? Including his musical references or his historic references.
Oh yeah, he brought up how many fouls does he have and how many points did he have last game, just out of nowhere, as if somehow I've got it all upstairs ready to roll off my tongue.
Keeps it interesting though, doesn't it, man?
Oh man, it does. This is great, Chris. I know you're pressed for time. You got a lot going on, so I really appreciate it, man.
Look forward to getting out there. Look forward to that beautiful stadium and having a good show on Monday night. Let's hope that both teams can make some plays, and look forward to connecting out there with you.